Today in the news, Paizo announces the new Circe Ancestry, which will be released with Howl of the Wild in 2024. This insectile ancestry is known to occasionally burrow its way to the surface of Golarion, with their most recent arrival being a result of the closing of the World Wound. This ancestry is clearly inspired by cicadas and will allow gamers to finally realize one of the most powerful fantasies that they possess, which is, of course, screaming endlessly for months at a time before finally going back to sleep. Polling is still in the early stages, but early indicators lead us to believe that the Circe may prove to be one of the top 3 ancestries ever for a TTRPG. It still remains to be seen, though, if they can gain enough popularity to supplant the current number 1, which is the Skittermanders from Starfinder. Today, I want to give my thoughts and reactions to some of the news that's been going on around the Paizoverse on today's episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I'm the Local Disaster Tour Guide. That's right, I'm a storyteller who is publicly calling upon Become Studios to give Amiri access to the friendly toss feat in the upcoming Abomination Vault ARPG. You know she needs to have that ability. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder, and welcome to honestly a video where I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to be doing with this, because recently Paizo has been just dropping a ton of news on our community, and there's just a lot of stuff going on. Now, one of the biggest sources of news recently has been PaizoCon, and so far I've made it through about 3.5 of the panels that Paizo has put up from PaizoCon. I watched Pathfinder Remastered and a few of the other panels that they put up, but there was a ton of news that dropped from that. And then, in addition to all of the information from PaizoCon, there's also been a lot of other stuff happening around the Paizoverse. For example, the 3rd draft of the Open RPG Creative License was recently submitted to the community for public feedback, and we are probably very, very close to seeing what the final version of the Open RPG Creative License is going to look like. That is some pretty big news. And then you also have the launch of the Kickstarter for the Abomination Vault's ARPG that Become Studios is going to be doing. As of recording this video, it stands at about 70% funding already. So there's a lot of exciting stuff going on there. And then, kind of just mixed into all of this stuff that is happening, there was also a leak about some of the information for the book Howl of the Wild, which is coming out for Pathfinder 2e next year. So, basically what I'm saying is, every time I try to take a week off on this channel, Paizo drops way too much stuff in my lap. Paizo, why do you keep doing this to me? Still today, I'm going to spend some time talking about all this news, some of the things I'm excited for, some of the things I'm concerned about, and what I think this means for the direction of Pathfinder and Starfinder and the various Paizo games overall, what it means to us as a gaming community. Still, there is so much stuff going on and so much stuff happening, there is no way I can get it all in this video, so you should definitely join in the conversation and let me know what news items from Paizo have caught your attention recently. What things are you excited about? What things are you concerned about? Jump down to the comments section and let me know your thoughts about everything that's happening around Paizo in recent days. Now yes, in doing that, I'm clearly asking you to feed the algorithm a little bit, but I hope you know by now that I am being genuine when I say that Interacting with you is one of my favorite things about doing a YouTube channel. I love talking to other nerds about my favorite hobby. So I would love to hear what news stands out to you. And if you would like to do some stuff to support this channel, you've got all the YouTube options out there. You can like the video and share it, subscribe to the channel. You can check out my free Discord and my Patreon. All of that stuff helps the channel to grow. But with all of that out of the way, let's get started. Now, overall, when it comes to everything happening around Pathfinder and Starfinder, in general, I'm very excited about what's happening. I think we are in a very interesting time. I think there's a lot of great things going on, and I definitely think there are a lot of positive things that as a gaming community we can look forward to. But I want to start this video by talking about some of my concerns, because as we go through especially the Pathfinder remaster process, I do think that there are some rough spots, and I do think there are some concerns that keep showing up for me, and I do think it's good to talk about and acknowledge these things because it is a real part of the conversation. You know, right now, the major piece of news in the Paizoverse is the Pathfinder 2e remaster. In November, we're going to get the first two new books of the Pathfinder 2e remaster, Player Core and GM Core. And then in 2024, we'll get two more books that are part of the remaster, which are Monster Core and Player Core 2. So we're coming up on one of the first major updates of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And in this whole process, I think Paizo has been very honest about their motivation, that a lot of what they're doing here is they are moving away from the open gaming license. If you don't know about or have willingly forgotten the controversy from earlier this year, I totally understand. I wish I could erase it from my brain too. But Paizo, very understandably, is trying to move away from the open gaming license because Wizards of the Coast has repeatedly shown themselves just to be actors in bad faith. I can understand Paizo's decision to move their game, their product, their livelihood away from the open gaming license. That's completely understandable, and I think Paizo is being genuine when they present that as their primary driver of this major change. Now, I think Paizo is being wise and looking for ways to improve their game as they do this, but one thing that I think is worth saying and just being honest about is, as a result of this remaster, Pathfinder 2e is losing some stuff. And it's losing some good stuff. This is something I think that keeps showing up in conversations that I think many people in the Pathfinder community just don't know how to put into words. And if I'm being honest, it's only recently that I figured out how to say it myself. But Paizo is removing several things from their game in an effort to protect themselves. And while that is completely reasonable, it also kind of hurts because in many ways Paizo is taking good things out of their game, and you hate to see good things go. Pathfinder 2nd Edition as a game, a lot of its history comes from Dungeons & Dragons. Now, obviously, I prefer Pathfinder 2e, and I consider it to be the superior game, but Dungeons & Dragons is a game that I enjoyed for many years, and it was a major part of my life. I still have a ton of really just wonderful memories tied to Dungeons & Dragons. Pathfinder 1e was explicitly built upon many of the fantastic strengths of D&D 3.5, and even though we're in the second edition of Pathfinder now, so much of Pathfinder's legacy comes from Dungeons & Dragons that to see some aspects of D&D removed from the game, let's just be honest, that hurts. Those things were part of the game for a reason. I think you can simply say it this way. Dungeons & Dragons did a lot of good things for tabletop RPGs. And even if Pathfinder needs to move away from D&D, even if we understand why we're going, it still kind of hurts to step away from what was such a positive influence on this game. You understand why the things have to go, but you hate to see them leave, and especially you hate to see them leave under what are such unfortunate and bitter circumstances. Right now there are several different things that are being pulled out of Pathfinder, and a lot of them, if I'm being honest, it kind of hurts to see them go. One example would be some of the lore changes that Paizo is being forced to do. Paizo has some of the best writers in the TTRPG industry. That is a hill I will gladly die on. I am consistently impressed by the quality of the writing that Paizo produces. For years in Dungeons & Dragons, I didn't find the Drow very compelling. Like, this is Drow of the Underdark from D&D 3.5, and to be honest, this book didn't impress me much. There's literally a point in that book where the authors admit that Drow society shouldn't logically function in any way, and then they just kind of wave their hands in the air and say, Loth did it. And, I remember many times in my Dungeons & Dragons days thinking that the Drow just weren't very compelling villains. Then you go over to Golarion and you see Paizo's take on the Drow. Many of the elements were the same, but the storytelling was so much better that the Drow ended up being, in some ways, almost a fallen hero kind of archetype, and I just found them a lot more compelling. Yes, Pathfinder inherited the Drow from another game, but Paizo did some really good things with them, and I hate to see those stories just wiped away. Another thing that's being changed is some of the elements of magic in Pathfinder 2e. These schools of magic, like abjuration, conjuration, divination, those things are going to be removed from the game because those are a holdover from Dungeons & Dragons. And we're also going to see some of the long-standing spell components, like somatic and verbal, removed from the game as well. And to be honest, I like spell schools and I like spell components, and Paizo, in their implementation of Pathfinder 2e, made spell schools and spell components better. I don't know if I'm the only one who remembers this, but one of the things I remember being hyped when Paizo was dropping the announcements for 2e was the idea that healing magic was now going to be explicitly part of necromancy. Like, here was this gamer argument that had been going on for decades, and Paizo just stepped in and said, we're doing the obvious thing. It was a wonderful change. And then tying spellcasting to action economy in Pathfinder 2e, that was a genius change. But the actual actions represented the different components you were using in casting your spells. You spend an action to make the somatic hand gestures. You spend an action to say the words of power, and in combining those actions, you create the spell. Paizo took schools and components and integrated them into the story in such a fantastic way that I loved it. I thought it was really well done, and while I understand the business necessity of the changes that Paizo is making, it still hurts to see those good things go. I will be the first to admit that some of the things I'm talking about here boil down to basically just semantic changes, like removing somatic and verbal components really just means that you're adding concentration and manipulation traits to spells. It's ultimately not that big a loss, but it still just kind of hurts to see something I've loved for so long vanish from the game. And I think that the changes around magic highlight another point that can be a little bit difficult. Things like spell schools and components are relatively minor changes, but even though the changes themselves are small individually, the cumulative effect of those changes on a class like the Wizard also causes me to be a little bit concerned. Yes, I think Paizo's got some creative ideas coming, but I also worry about how much those decisions are going to compound together to affect the play experience. Another change, and this is one we knew about before PaizoCon even happened, is the removal of alignment. Again, I understand why the alignment table is being taken out of the game, and I'll even be the first to say I think Edicts and Anathema were a fantastic addition to the game, but still, I like alignment. I realize there's a lot of people who argue about alignment, and I will admit that alignment has its issues, but for all of the issues alignment has caused, I also think alignment has done a lot of good for gaming as well. I'm sure this will not get any negative replies in the comments section. And I do think alignment has also brought a lot of clarity to games and expectations at the gaming table. The sum total of all of this is Dungeons & Dragons did some good things, and Pathfinder inherited some good things from its gaming history. I know why these changes are happening, but I also think it's fair to say, as a gamer, that it's hard to see some of these changes happen, and even if I am genuinely excited for what's coming, I also have concerns about some of the things that are going away. But even if I have concerns about what's happening in the Paizoverse, I do think there is a ton of stuff to be excited about as well. And to tackle the somewhat boring topic first, that is still very, very important, the Open RPG Creative License is almost here. They've had 3 rounds of public feedback, and we are probably very, very close to seeing the final version of the Orc license. I think that that license is going to be very important to supporting creativity in the TTRPG sphere. The Open Gaming License was a wonderful thing, but unfortunately the actions of Wizards of the Coast have left a dark stain on the creative process inside of the gaming industry as a whole, and I am very excited to see how hard Paizo has worked to set up the Open RPG Creative License as a document to provide security to game publishers, to content creators, to anyone who wants to enter this space and contribute to this fantastic hobby. The Open Gaming License did a lot of wonderful things, and Paizo is doing some serious work to replace the Open Gaming License with a document that is going to be much more stable, much more reliable, and hopefully free from the kinds of insane shenanigans we saw earlier in 2023. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not qualified to dig into all of the minutiae of the Open RPG Creative License, but even if I'm not a lawyer, I do think it is very much something that the gaming community should celebrate, that the Orc license is going to be an option in the gaming community in the near future. This is a big moment, and it's something I think we can all be excited for. Also, this is a good moment to highlight another thing about Paizo that I think is easy to overlook, but I think is worth discussing. Paizo has shown themselves to be fantastic corporate actors in the past 6 months. When you compare their behavior to Wizards of the Coast, Paizo has shown themselves to be thoughtful, to be considerate, to be patient, and to be focused on the health of gaming as a whole, not just the immediate concerns of their company. One of the smaller news items right now is that some of the information about Paizo's book, Howl of the Wild, that's going to be released next year, some of that information leaked out early. Now, I don't work for Paizo, and my connections to Paizo are honestly fairly limited, but in my limited connections, one thing I can say is Paizo responded to that leaked information in what I thought was a very polite and professional manner. Yes, that information getting out early was a frustrating situation for them, but to see a company respond kindly and with grace despite the fact they were frustrated, I mean, in 2023 and in hobby gaming, that's a pretty big thing. I think it's a credit to Paizo's leadership that they have responded to all of this chaos and all of this craziness, and they've done so with patience and with a steady eye towards the bigger picture and towards the overall health of the gaming community. When that information got out for Howl of the Wild, Paizo just said, well, let's make the best of a bad situation and share it ourselves and go ahead and start working with that information being out there. Bravo, Paizo. That was a class act. And we might as well use that to segue into some of the information that got out for Howl of the Wild. We do now officially know all 6 of the Ancestries that are going to be released with Howl of the Wild next year. We were already aware of the Centaur and the Minotaur. Both of those will be coming out, but now we've got the 4 new Ancestries as well. One of them is going to be the Merfolk, and that confirms my suspicion that my wife has been secretly bribing Paizo because she's been demanding the opportunity to play a Merfolk for about 2 years now, and I think she just finally managed to twist Paizo's arm and get them to print the rules for it. We're also going to get another Ancestry whose name I can never remember. I'll try to have it posted on the side of the screen over here. But basically it's a reworking of a type of fishfolk from D&D. And then the other two that are going to be added, these are actually brand new concepts that are going to be coming into Pathfinder 2e. One is the Circi, which are an insect-like ancestry, very much inspired by cicadas, and honestly, I'm very excited to see what Paizo is going to be doing with them. I'm seeing a lot of fun sonic attacks in the future, but probably the ancestry that's going to get the most hype is Paizo is just officially publishing the stats for playing an awakened animal. As someone who has run some Starfinder and seen just how popular uplifted bears are in Starfinder, it makes complete sense that Paizo decided to go ahead and make awakened animals a thing. That truly needed to happen. I honestly can't believe I didn't predict that. But we are going to be getting rules for playing an awakened animal. That's coming out next year. And that is probably the most hyped thing in the entire Howl of the Wild book that is coming out. I think that is pretty cool to see. And on the subject of ancestries, when you look at the Pathfinder remaster, one thing that it's clear Paizo is doing is they're taking a serious look at ancestries and heritages and versatile heritages with a goal of making it a stronger part of the play experience. If you've seen some of my reviews of the Lost Omen series, you would know that in the last roughly 8 months, some of the ancestry options that Paizo have been publishing, I haven't been the biggest fan of, and I felt like the ancestry options were getting weaker and less compelling. So to see Paizo doing some serious work with the remaster to make ancestries deeper and more interesting and more compelling, I think that's a very good change. Paizo has already publicly teased some of the changes that are going to be coming with the dwarves, including the absolutely fantastic new 17th level dwarf ancestry feat, Stone Wall, where you can turn yourself into a statue to avoid damage. That's just beautiful. I loved that concept. You can tell that Paizo is really putting some effort into making Ancestry a compelling part of the game. Ancestry is now going to affect edicts and anathema. That is honestly something so obvious I can't believe I haven't thought of it before. You know, there's just a lot of changes like this coming, and one of the things that we already know about the player core is that versatile heritages are going to be part of Player Core 1. Versatile heritages were introduced in the Advanced Player's Guide, but now they're just going to be a core part of the game. And versatile heritages are honestly one of the most brilliant ideas I think Paizo has had. Now, one of the big pieces of news is the Azamar and the Tieflings. Because that terminology is tied to the history of D&D, Paizo is going to be taking that terminology out, and they're going to be creating a new versatile heritage called the Nephilim, which represents characters with ties to the Outer Planes. Paizo is doing some reworking there, but honestly I think it sounds like that rework is going in a healthy direction. I just think it is very clear that Paizo is taking a serious look at ancestries and heritages and the supporting options under that, and doing a good job of making that a serious part of play experience. And a good example of this, something I am honestly surprised has not been talked about by other content creators very much, is mixed ancestries are core. That's going to be true in Player Core 1. Half-elf, half-orc, those are no longer human heritages, those are now versatile heritages. The panel actually gave the new name of half-elf and half-orc as they exist in the Galarian setting, and I did not try to spell that because I know I would get it wrong. But what was once considered an optional rule for Pathfinder, that half-elf and half-orc could be tied to an ancestry other than human, now that is a core part of the game, and on top of that, they've actually discussed that other potential mixed ancestries, there's going to be some information for game masters and players, so that if you want to do something like, say, a half-dwarf, that there will be some support and some guidance so that you can do that in-game. This is a change that I honestly think Pathfinder 2e has needed since day one, and I am so happy that Paizo is doing it. We also know as a result of the remaster that Paizo is reworking other aspects of the game. One of the aspects of the game that is getting a lot of attention is how Paizo is going to be modifying classes in Pathfinder 2e, and especially in Player Core 1, I almost feel like the conversation is less about how Paizo is going to modify classes, so much as how Paizo is going to modify subclasses to help add to the story and play experience of characters inside the game. Like, one of the things that has been discussed is the War Priest doctrine for clerics is going to be getting some serious upgrades, with options for things like the use of heavy armor and access to master proficiency with their deity's preferred weapon. For me, personally, I've always felt like the War Priest was pretty solid from levels 1 to level 10, but then level 11 and higher, I felt like the War Priest got a lot less interesting, and it sounds like Paizo is doing some serious work to make the longevity and appeal of the War Priest apply over the whole course of play. I think that's a really good thing. Another class that is getting some really serious rework is the Witch, with a lot of extra flavor and options related to patrons. And I'll go ahead and say Nonat dived into a lot of the announcements around this, so you should check out his video if you want a lot of details. But for an example of some of the changes, patrons are going from generic descriptions to specific names. So the Curses patron may now be the Vengeance, which must be said exactly like that. Or the Winter patron may be the Silence and the Snow. Patrons are getting a serious flavor upgrade, and one of the things they've announced is that your patron as a witch will grant specific and unique abilities to your witch's familiar, which is honestly something that the witch's familiar probably needed. But if you were to dig through a lot of the announcements related to different classes in Pathfinder 2e, you'll see some changes to classes as a whole, so, rogues getting all martial weapons, but oftentimes what I feel like Paizo is really focused on is looking at particular subclasses that didn't have quite the right appeal or quite the right support, and finding ways to bring those subclasses up to parity with other options inside the game. So if you had a druid order that was underperforming, or a bard muse that just needed a little more oomph, Paizo has taken a detailed look at the options and is finding ways to make sure that each option under a given class is truly compelling and engaging, and that is something I really enjoy. On the Game Master side of things, longtime fans of the channel will not be surprised by this at all. Paizo has announced new vehicle rules, new vehicle options, and better organization of vehicle rules and options. So thank you, Paizo, for finally addressing one of the things I've been harping on for about 3 years now. But Paizo said we're going to get to see things like hot air balloons, and we already know there's an airship in Howl of the Wild, so I think there's going to be a lot of fun vehicle options added to the game, and I am very, very excited about that. On the monsters side of things, we know that Paizo is taking the time to rework a lot of their monsters, again in a very clear effort to kind of separate themselves from what Wizards of the Coast has done in the past. But one of the things that Paizo said that they want to do is they want to get back to a lot of the cultural origins of particular monsters, so that the way they can be used in Pathfinder 2e is going to be a better reflection of the stories that those monsters are drawn from. And one of the examples that they gave was the Sweet Hag that can kind of bake spells into a treat or a candy of some kind, going back to all of those fun Grimm's fairy tales that I heard growing up. Now, I suspect as the months go on, we're probably going to get a lot more examples and a lot more fun artwork related to all these monster rewrites. One of the ones that Paizo is selling a lot right now is their new approach to dragons. They're moving away from the D&D style dragons, and going forward, their approach to dragons is going to be much more based around the different spellcasting traditions inside of Pathfinder 2e, and honestly, this is a change that I think is very good. Right now, we've seen a lot of the Diabolic Dragon, which has ties to the Plains of Hell, and then we have an Arcane Dragon that I love the artwork on, the Mirage Dragon. But Paizo has clearly said that for dragons going forward, they want to clearly and specifically tie them to the way that magic functions in the Galarian universe, and I think that's very logical, and I think it's also going to help Paizo kind of distinguish their content from some of the historical elements that were previously in the game, and honestly I think that's a good thing. When it comes to the remaster, yes, I feel like Paizo is being forced to remove some good content because of unfortunate circumstances, but I feel like the fantastic writers at Paizo are really showing their creative chops in pushing for fantastic replacements, and I'm excited to see all of the elements Paizo is going to bring into the game and see how they really make this game their own. Now, one last piece of news I want to discuss before I leave this video is the Kickstarter for the Abomination Vaults ARPG that is being produced by Become Studios. As of the recording of this video, I think the project stands about 70% funded, and honestly, as someone who enjoyed playing Diablo in the past, I'm really excited to see a Diablo-style game set in the Golarion universe. I'm going to have some fun with this one. But I am truly very excited to see what Paizo and Become Studios cook up with Abomination Vaults. This is one of Paizo's most successful adventure paths. I think this game is going to present an excellent hook for people to learn about Golarion and learn about Pathfinder and maybe get drawn into this hobby a little more directly. But I can also say, in the little bit I've seen from the Kickstarter, it looks like Paizo and Become are working on genuinely trying to translate Pathfinder into an ARPG, at least as well as that can be. One of the things that they've described as a goal for that game is having a kind of team attack, where, for example, Ezrin the Wizard might throw up a wall of fire, and then Amiri can use her whirlwind attack to go through that wall of fire and add fire damage to her swings. I think team-up attacks like that are going to be a lot of fun. I look forward to using those in the game, and if I'm being entirely honest, it's also kind of inspired me to think a little more critically about how Pathfinder 2e can grow, because Pathfinder 2e is a very teamwork-oriented TTRPG, and teamwork attacks would fit perfectly in this game. Like, barbarians literally have a feat called Friendly Toss, where they can throw one of their allies 30 feet, and then that ally, if they land beside an enemy, can spend their reaction to perform a melee strike. Like, teamwork attacks just fit thematically with what Paizo has done in Pathfinder, and Become Studios has suddenly made me start thinking, how can I incorporate teamwork attacks into my gaming table? I think that's a really cool concept, and it looks like Become Studios is exploring that play space, and I kind of wonder if Paizo is going to start exploring that play space as well. I know I've mentioned it twice in this video already, but the Friendly Toss feat that barbarians have kind of gives you a very easy model for a tabletop RPG. The barbarian spends a couple of actions to do a specific thing, and then their ally can spend a reaction to respond to that. It's a pretty straightforward mechanic that wouldn't be hard to incorporate, and I think it fits the feel of the game really, really well. So I'm actually kind of excited about Abomination Vaults, not just because it's going to be a Pathfinder-themed video game, but because it kind of looks like Paizo and Become might be exploring what else can be done with Pathfinder, and I could see this video game becoming a positive influence on the direction that Pathfinder 2e goes. But I think that's where I'm going to leave this video for today. I have barely scratched the surface of all of the news that Paizo has had going on around them in the last couple of weeks, so let me turn the conversation over to you. What are your thoughts about some of the news items that I've been discussing, and are there news items that I didn't mention today that have really caught your attention? Are there things that you are extremely excited for? Are there things that you have concerns about? And overall, what is your impression of the direction that Paizo and their games are going? Are you excited? Are you hesitant? Let me know in the comments section. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget all of that other YouTube stuff as well. Like, share, subscribe, check out Discord, check out Patreon. But as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.